Now that we went through this pyramid and understood a little bit what kind of arguments exist, what types of arguments do we have, I'm pretty excited to show you how exactly do you build those kind of arguments, going from bottom up. Lesson 1, Part 3. In this part, we're gonna use the pyramid and my ridiculous pizza video to see how we build an effective argument. Let's start.
Ladies and gentlemen, take a seat, grab some popcorn and a notebook. There are some useful tips here for you to enjoy.
Cool. So how do we do that? Basically, we ask questions. A. What are you fighting against? If a terrorist comes and wants to take away your wife, focus on saving your wife and your life and not on explaining what human rights are. B. What are the building blocks, axioms, that the argument is built on? C. Does the construction make sense? A lot of arguments sound like, oh, you see all that silk? This is how I'm building a car. There are laws of physics and laws of chemistry. And also, there are laws on how you can build an argument. Okay, running through the first 3 types of arguments, aka personal attacks. So the first one is name calling, and here you can be very creative and just let your emotions flow, and you don't have to think too hard. You can watch the pizza video and say, she looks miserable. Or you can say, well, she looks insane. She didn't blend her concealer properly. And the last one really bugged me. Okay, can't believe I'm helping you with this, but this is how to make name-calling, quote-unquote, effective. Keep in mind, I'm staying at the name-calling realm here only. 1. What you say needs to be perceived as true by others or the speaker itself. 2. To have a stereotype bias attached to it. For example, saying the speaker is crazy, emotionally unstable, hysterical, etc. is especially effective when 1. It's perceived as true. If the speaker has an history of running around naked, it sure does help. There are maybe visual cues in the video, like maybe the speaker occasionally licks the palm of their hand or something, or the speaker is a woman. 2. Bias and stereotypes. Not saying you think that way, but I think a lot do. Being emotional, hysterical, or crazy doesn't change the relevance of an argument. Sometimes crazy people say smart things. Sometimes charismatic, charming, and seemingly sane people say dangerous, crazy things. Ad hominem. I'm not an historian or whatever. Like,
ain't nobody got time for this.
It's not that complicated. Responding to tone, you can say, well, this person sounds really angry. Again, there is not a real argument here. When is it okay to use name calling, to use ad hominem, and to use responding to tone? The first case is when you're very hungry and you suffer from temporary brain damage. Then it is acceptable. I give you my permission. The second case is when the person who is arguing or telling the argument doesn't have the capacity of logical reasoning. There is no point in arguing with them based on knowledge or truth or facts or logical reasoning because they will not accept it anyway. And you really want it to be clear that you can't stand them. This is hopefully something that is rare and also kind of pathetic. Third, you're trying to manipulate someone and you're lazy about it. For example, somebody's talking to you and you drive them crazy on purpose and their tone starts to become threatening or angry or frustrated, and then you use the fact that their tone changed as a way to attack them. Well, those are the 3 cases I thought of when I thought about when is it okay to use the first 3, and that's all I came up with. Italian food. The Italians dare to claim pizza when they have something like tomato in it. We all know that tomato is American. What makes it even worse is how dare the Italians claim it as their own with all the things the Italians did against the Native American population. Let me tell you something, okay? Columbus, yes, he was Italian. I let that sink in for a moment. Every time you eat pizza, you support colonialism.
Going to build real arguments now, but first, let's get these kind of arguments out of the way.
So, let's say you can say that pizza is Indonesian, and that would be a lie, but that would be also kind of an argument. If it were to be true, then you can see how simple it is to completely debunk those claims that I made. So finding those points can be, it's something that you can learn to do, but it also requires some prior knowledge, which is something that in many debates is a requirement, and therefore sometimes that's the barrier between being able to actually point out when something is BS.
Morality is an argument. Don't assume others play by your rules.
Alright, so the next thing that we have is contradiction. Pizza is bad. Well, I'm saying pizza is good. That's it. That's the opposing case. Alright? Pizza is cultural appropriation. I say pizza is not cultural appropriation, it's cultural fusion.
Contradiction is most effective when you're offering an alternative, hopefully a one that actually addresses the main pain point.
Counterargument. Pizza is yummy.
Wait, is that a good argument? I thought we agreed that this is not the pain point.
The fact that pizza is yummy is something that the video ignored. And we can tell from real life that when it comes to food, most people, no matter how much you're gonna try to persuade people that the food they consume is bad, it is very, very hard for people to give up on food.
When the doctor says you should eat healthier food, it makes sense. But this is the exception that proves the rule. Controlling what you eat is like it sounds. A way to establish dominance, hierarchy, a way to separate groups from the general population. By the way, if the argument that pops to your head is something like, don't eat whales, well, the argument here is, don't hunt whales, and that is completely different.
This is a good point, because when you debate and argue with someone, you also need to keep in mind human nature. And even if you agree with a cause or you don't, you need to say, is this fight worth fighting for, when you know how hard psychologically it is for a person to say, yes, I'm going to give up on pizza. Sometimes when you want to get somebody closer to you, you don't want to start with something that will make them distance themselves from you, but you want to pull him in saying, I hear you, I understand, but is it worth it? Does this thing worth it? And that's another thing that you can do. Here is an interesting thing, because it's a counter argument saying pizza is good, pizza is yummy. Here, well, usually you would have to cite some sort of proof or reasoning to prove your point, for it to be a counter argument. But in case of pizza, saying pizza is yummy or pizza tastes good kinda doesn't really require a reasoning or a proof. Pizza is yummy is actually an axiom, something that we agree on. I want to touch on something that happens a lot, especially when we are talking about minorities, where someone uses one specific minority group member to try to represent the whole minority. For example, is saying something like, I have a friend who is Native American and she loves pizza.
Correction, and my friend just called saying that her family is originally from Canada and they didn't have tomatoes. And also that she is not an elected spokesperson for the Native American population.
Refutation. This is the interesting part, which requires a little bit more of understanding of construction of an argument and also the deconstruction of an argument. This is kind of where the claim Columbus was sent by the Spaniard falls. And this argument I love, first of all, because a lot of people could not even give me a single argument. So here is something that's a single argument, at least that. And it kind of a good way to understand why refutation is so hard. I never claimed in that video anything else. I only said that Columbus was Italian. I did not say that he was not sent by the Spaniards, meaning this fact does not change anything. It only takes my argument from pizza is very bad to pizza is bad realm. But assuming the goal is to protect the awesomeness of pizza, the greatness of pizza, then we need to go from pizza is very bad to pizza is great or awesome or good, and not stay in the pizza is bad realm. So this is where we're gonna need to be more sophisticated and see how we can incorporate better techniques and tactics of building an argument. I've been kind of trash talking about this argument with Columbus was Italian but he was sent by the Spaniards thing, but I want to also say something. Part of critical thinking is also, when you ask questions, is doubting everything that is being said, including me. Meaning, why do you believe me that this argument doesn't work? Maybe you did not believe me, but let's say you did. Why is it the first thing that was used? Because I said, my friends are not stupid, they're smart people. So why the first argument that came to mind was that? So there are several reasons for that. And okay, so there are several reasons for that I analyzed and I think led to that argument to be so popular. And here is another question that somebody might wonder. You spend your whole life arguing. Why aren't we not better at it? Or another thing is, I said that this argument is weak, but is it weak? Is it? Because let's think about it. Why does it work? Well, we learn from arguing and from our experience many times arguments like that do work. And why an argument like that does work is that, first of all, you need to understand the psychology of the opponent. And in general, what ways do we use to win arguments that are not direct, that are not something that is part of the path of understanding and seeking the truth?
Distraction. Let's not argue about colonialism, cultural appropriation, or pizza. Nope. How about we argue instead on whether the responsibility falls on the individual or those who sent him?
Distraction. Taking an argument from a realm that we are not being comfortable with and we don't know how to argue about to somewhere that we can. We do it very much automatically. We find the point where is the most comfortable for us to argue with and we focus on that. And what happens is that many times we manage to drag our opponent with us to this realm where we can argue more easily. For example, if you're having a fight with your spouse and they didn't clean the dishes, then their arguments will be to point out all the times that you did not make the bed. This is a distraction because this argument is no longer about the dishes but about the bed. And I would personally recommend to settle one argument at a time and not to try to settle everything at once.
The blame game.
Just blame someone else. First of all, it is disputed whether or not he was Italian, but since I purposefully received a lot of feedback from Italians, they would not admit that part. But they would admit that Columbus was not sent by the Italians, that he was sent by the Spaniards.
Italians are awesome. Let's throw Spanish people under the bus. No more tomato throwing festival for you. Haha.
And that's the easiest fact that comes to mind.
Target insecurity.
This is a way of emotionally tripping your opponent.
It also kind of sounds like, actually, he was sent by spam. Haha, you is stupid.
Even if you find the smallest mistake in what somebody else is saying, in a way, the most dirty, ugly way of doing that is fixing somebody's grammar. It falls under the psychological effect of refutation, but it doesn't refute the argument. But it kind of, if you're not feeling confident, if the person you're arguing with is not being completely confident, things like that might make them feel less confident, less secure, and less sure of themselves.
Gotta admit, the fact that this simple argument manages to distract, blame, and tries to inject insecurity is kind of impressive.
So yeah, it works. Many times it works, but then it becomes a power game, friction, and no longer a debate or a discussion or something that has a real philosophical purpose. So why do we get stuck after that? You give 0 arguments or this one argument, and then people got stuck. Why did they get stuck? Claiming that pizza equates to colonialism. This is kind of mind-boggling, like why? So it grabs your attention and kind of distracts you from everything else that I'm saying. How do you move past that point where you're just, okay, I don't know what to say now?
Keep it cool. We fixate on what invokes an emotional response.
Blaming the Italians for what happened to the Native Americans has an effect. It invokes an emotional discomfort. So the attention immediately goes to that.
Follow the way the argument was built.
What makes it even worse is how dare the Italians claim it as their own with all the things the Italians did against the Native American population. Wait, what? What just happened here? This is where we have the biggest jump in logic, where in the beginning I just stated statements without any proof, and then I talked about tomatoes, and that was just some historical facts, and then suddenly I went from Columbus being Italian to Native Americans are dead. And that's a big logical jump.
Pride goes against us.
Well, my claims were that in the beginning that I stated that pizza perpetuates colonialism and that it is cultural appropriation. For a lot of people, cultural appropriation is not defined.
Usually during an argument, we don't want to tackle those things that we don't understand. More often than not, it is exactly what you need to focus on. If the terms used are unfamiliar, that's on the speaker, not the listener. Ask for the definition.
Refutation requires quoting and then pointing out a mistake, and also to refute the central point you need to understand what is the central point. But how? How do you do that? Going back to those 3 points I touched before, what are you fighting against? What is your goal? Is it to change my perception of colonialism, change my perception of cultural appropriation? Is it to prove that pizza is not bad? What is your goal? What are you trying to achieve? Going back to the pizza video, what is the main argument? Pizza should be banned. I'm going to assume that our goal is, first of all, defend the honor of pizza. The main argument is pizza is bad, and this stands on 3 secondary arguments. 1, pizza is not healthy. I only say it at the very end. 2, pizza supports colonialism. 3, pizza is cultural appropriation. After recognizing the main argument, we need to recognize the axioms that were presented in the argument. This is what the argument stands on. So if you remove the building blocks, obviously the structure is going to fall down. Axioms are definitions, facts, values, assumptions, and bias. Definitions. The most obvious definition I explicitly brought was the definition of pizza. I said pizza is bread, tomato, and cheese. And there are other implicit definitions. For example, we can start talking about, well, how do you define colonialism? How do you define cultural appropriation? Those are definitions. Definitions are definitions. Are you arguing on the same thing? For example, someone can say computer games are bad, and then you start arguing with them, and you argue and argue and argue, and after some time you understand when they mean computer games, they mean online gambling, and you were thinking about more easily accepted computer games. So definitions are important. And then we have facts. You can claim that Columbus is Italian is a fact. Another thing that is a fact is that tomato comes from the Americans, that it was not native to Europe, that the Europeans thought it was toxic. All of those things are facts. And then there are values, and values are things that are individual. For example, people believe in the value of freedom, people believe in the value of equality, people believe in all kinds of values, but the thing about values that it sometimes goes into the realm of faith, something that you believe in just because you believe in it, and it's okay. And those are the kind of arguments that are hardest to argue with. If you believe in God and that's your value, well, it's very hard to argue against that because that's a belief. Another value you can have is patriotism, right? It doesn't have to be rational, and you can even understand that it's not rational and still choose to be patriotic because it goes into the realm of values. So here you can see several values, and the values I'm bringing is that colonialism is bad and also cultural appropriation is bad. Those are values. Assumptions. There are a few assumptions here. First of all, assumption that is kind of factual too is that people claim that pizza is Italian. This is sort of something between assumption and fact, because I did not say that, checking if there was a survey that asked people where is pizza from and they answered Italian. I'm just assuming this is a fact, and it probably is a fact. And other assumptions I'm having, how intellectual property works. For example, I'm saying that since pizza has tomato, it is no longer Italian. But is this how intellectual property works at all? If you use an ingredient that is foreign, but it's your combination, does it not make it your intellectual property anymore? Those are issues that were resolved previously, so we need to get to know the law of intellectual property and see if you agree on that. Okay, another assumption I had, which is more implicit, is that Italians claim that tomato is theirs, which is a real assumption because I've never actually heard an Italian say, no, tomatoes are an Italian thing.
No, that tomato is American. It never got to Europe until recently. In fact, they were also sure it's toxic, that tomatoes are toxic, and it took a long time until Europeans even ate tomato. But once they ate it, well, oh, that's ours now, huh?
Bias means, well, I bring some assumptions that, or some view that is an effect of the way I grew up, for example, or some misconceptions.
Remember how I said that Columbus was sent by Spain argument ticked all the bad methods people use to argue? Coincidence? I think not. We can program our brain to think a certain way by limiting the examples it sees, and it makes it hard to think of other methods, like the good old guilt trip method. Didn't the Italians suffer enough?
And 3, recognize when the pyramid is upside down. The most common way it happens is when people don't know how to read statistics, for example, when they bring statistical fact but then misuse it. And this is something that is usually easy to point to if you understand how to read statistics. Another thing that people do is wrong logical moves. For example, if all elephants are gray, not everything that is gray is an elephant. And this is a mistake you're supposed to be able to recognize. If something is a product of colonialism, so what? If something is a product of colonialism, does it perpetuate colonialism? And if it does, what does it mean? If something is triggering, that it makes it bad. Well, maybe diabetics get triggered by sugar. Does it mean that sugar should be banned too?
Next time I'll talk about something that will really push you in the right direction when it comes to your own health and social justice. Next time, we're gonna talk about how sugar is a trigger to slavery-related traumas.
So how would you approach this debate in the most effective way? Well, first of all, you can say things like, this is not how intellectual property works. You can also say, well, just because something is triggering doesn't mean it should be banned. You can give like a counter-argument that comes from rationality, for example, saying, well, nobody thinks about colonialism when they look at pizza, and therefore, does it really matter? And that's a more philosophical question. Something that I said is that pizza is made out of bread, tomato, and cheese. Is this the definition of pizza? Then how do you explain pizza blanca or pizza that doesn't have a tomato? Is it not pizza anymore? Once you realize that the definition is wrong, the whole argument falls apart. A knockout. There you go. Pizza doesn't have to have a tomato, and it doesn't perpetuate colonialism and everything else that's been said. And it's especially effective when the person you're talking to has ridiculous claims like that, where you can see there's something completely off with their logical abilities. Finding something like wrong usage of definition, something that is so hard to argue with, really can help you with people that would do anything possible to distort the truth. So why didn't we think about it? Maybe because it's not only pizza. A lot of the Italian cuisine has tomatoes in it. Does it take away the legitimacy of using tomatoes in the Italian cuisine? If you decide that the main argument is actually to defend your right to use tomatoes in cuisine that is out of the Mexican cuisine, which I guess this is where tomatoes are originated from, I did not check. The kind of arguments that you need to use are a little bit different. Let me know in the comments below if that was your goal, to defend the right to use tomatoes. How would you approach it? And that's it. That was the first lesson. I hope it gave you some kind of a taste of the world of argument and debate and logical thinking. Thank you so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, share this video, and see you later.